I quit my job. When my beloved father passed away, my husband suddenly quit his job. My father-in-law also declared with a smile, I quit my job too. When I learned about their resignation, my heart sank. Why had I been dedicating myself to these people all this time? The path I chose, after understanding everything, was the only one. I will get a divorce and move to a different place, I declared. This statement faced fierce opposition from my in-laws. However, I had another plan in mind. When I uttered words like magic, they agreed to the divorce. They didn't realize that this was the beginning of my retaliation. This was the start of my revenge. I am Lucy. Since marrying Paul, I have been living in the same house as his parents. Paul and I met at work. Since I was employed at my father's company, everyone was initially reserved around me, but Paul alone treated me no differently than others. I found this attractive and proposed to him. My father, who raised me alone after my mother passed away at a young age, was delighted with our marriage. But what? Live together? Of course. I'm the eldest son. While it was true that Paul was the only son, his parents were still in their mid-50s. My father-in-law was very active, and there was no need to take care of them. I saw no necessity for living together. The marriage talks had already progressed in the community, and it was difficult to say, actually, let's not do this. I ended up agreeing to live with them, especially since I didn't want to disappoint my father, who was genuinely happy about our marriage. But I had no idea that this would be the prologue to a series of mistakes. Once we started living together, I found out that my in-laws had very conservative values, especially regarding the role of a wife, which seemed very low to them. A wife's job is to serve her husband and his parents. My father-in-law declared categorically, "You will take over all the house chores starting tomorrow," added my mother-in-law, with Paul simply saying, "I want you to make it easier for my parents." Thus began my days of hardship. Not long after we started living together, I became pregnant and suffered greatly from morning sickness. However, my mother-in-law stated, morning sickness is not an illness, and did not allow me to rest. Paul, whom I had hoped would support me, looked down on me exhausted and said, "This is where women are weak. What a hassle." Even though I was carrying his child, how could he say such a thing? It didn't stop there. Paul frequently said, "Women are foolish, women are incompetent," showing contempt for me. It was infuriating, and I once retorted, "Your mother is also a woman, you know." To which Paul responded with a sneer, "My mom is admirable, unlike you. After all, she raised a son like me. If you're unsatisfied, why don't you give birth to a boy? Doesn't he know that the father's genes determine the gender of the child? I intended to love my child whether it was a boy or a girl. Any child should be precious. However, I was not destined to hold that baby, perhaps to distress. We lost our child before reaching the stable period of the pregnancy. My in-laws were clearly disappointed, and Paul muttered, "You're useless." There was no one in this house to encourage me, and the days just went on. While in physical and emotional pain, I took on all the household duties, continued to work, and sometimes even cared for my in-laws. When my mother-in-law's acquaintance visited, I was expected to be by her side like a maid, and my father-in-law frequently caused trouble by drinking outside, which always resulted in me intervening to mediate. My days were literally a battle. Amidst the hectic daily life, Paul was absorbed in his own world. What he did was go to work, play his favorite games, or drink at his favorite bar. There were many days when he did not return home until morning. After years of such a lifestyle, my body seemed to have reached its limit. At the supermarket, I suddenly lost consciousness. As I fell to the ground, various thoughts raced through my mind. Of all times, now. I was taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and the diagnosis was overwork. As usual, my in-laws did not care about me at all. They were only concerned about their public image and their own interests. Without even showing their faces at the hospital, my mother-in-law scolded me over the phone. "What do you mean by collapsing at the supermarket? How embarrassing. I'm sorry. Will you be able to attend the neighborhood association event you said you would handle?" I had taken paid leave for today's neighborhood association meeting at my mother-in-law's request, but I hadn't expected it would turn out like this. I never thought she would say such a thing under these circumstances. I'm currently on an IV, so it'll be impossible for me to attend. What? Figure out a way to attend. I have plans to watch a movie with my friends. Just for that. Although I thought so, I didn't have the energy to argue. There was 1 hour left until the IV was finished. If I hurried, I might just make it in time. Understood. When I hung up the phone, my mother-in-law's voice sounded satisfied. An hour later, I rushed home and, after participating in the community meeting, returned to find my father-in-law waiting at the entrance. How late can you be? I was supposed to have you accompany me to the hospital today. Oh yeah, I remembered. We agreed that I would take care of my in-laws' appointments on the day I took paid leave. I'm sorry, but please take a taxi today. I was so exhausted that I just wanted to sleep. Hey, didn't you promise to take me too? Paul appeared, saying that. I remembered him mentioning a drinking party with friends tonight. It seemed he had taken half a day off and returned home. If that was the case, I would have preferred him to take his father. I'm not in a condition to drive today. Paul responded with a laugh to my feeble statement. You should be energetic since you've had an IV. You couldn't have a child, so at least work. That is, even if I explained that I collapsed from overwork, they wouldn't understand. It's a waste to pay for a taxi. You broke your promise, so you should pay. My father-in-law was just showing his anger. In this situation, if I didn't get things done, this issue would be brought up again and again in the future. I mustered my strength, drove the car, and took my father-in-law from the hospital to our home and then Paul to his event. Upon arrival, Paul's friends, including some young and attractive women, had already gathered. I kind of felt sorry for myself. Paul smiled happily and lightly patted my shoulder. See, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. However, I felt this effort was misplaced. Anyways, the task was completed. I lost the energy to respond to Paul and was about to start the car when I heard a voice from outside. Hey, she's ugly, right? She's more of a housekeeper than a woman. Laughter erupted. Paul had never once introduced me to his friends. The wedding had been postponed due to pregnancy and remained so. I never imagined I would be treated this way while I was unwell and without makeup. Tears overflowed with sadness and anger. When I returned home, my mother-in-law's discarded clothes were scattered on the floor. Laundry was overflowing, and the sink was full of dishes. No one in this house ever did house chores, even at times like this. With a sense of despair, I went straight to bed. It seems I fell asleep without realizing it. When I woke up, it was the middle of the night, and I could hear cheerful voices somewhere in the house. Quietly leaving the room, I moved toward the voices. The voice belonged to a drunken Paul, who was talking to someone on the phone. If I had met you, Mary, first, I wouldn't have married that ugly woman. Hey, let's meet up again, okay? From the conversation, it sounded like the two had a close relationship. Thinking about it, there were young women around Paul. I never thought it would be possible, but I was shocked. I know I'm not a world-class beauty, but I always took care of my appearance when going out. I've been serious about my work and household duties. To keep my father from worrying, I've always maintained a smile at work without complaining. I've put effort into my work at home and met my in-laws' demands without ever voicing any complaints. Even when I collapsed from overwork, I never blamed anyone. Yet, don't worry, I plan to leave her sooner or later. That single phrase pierced through my heart as I left the room. Returning to bed, I shed silent tears. I no longer knew how much effort would have been enough. I have never experienced such pain and sadness. With this in mind, I faced the next morning, but more bad news awaited. What? No way. Early in the morning, I received a call from Mr. Reed, a close business associate of my father. Having known him since I was a child, he was like an uncle to me. Please stay calm. The president, your father, has passed away in an accident. I stood frozen, unable to do anything. Sensing something was wrong, Paul took the phone from me and heard the news of my father's death. He immediately took action, rushing me to the hospital. I hardly remember what happened afterward. Seeing my father's face, I had to accept reality, but my emotions couldn't keep up. After the funeral, a lawyer visited and informed me, the only daughter, that I had inherited $2 million and a high-rise apartment from him. Honestly, I would have preferred my father to be alive rather than to have that wealth. Returning to my family home, I sorted through my father's belongings, and his longtime colleagues visited, offering words of encouragement. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. You're like our own daughter. Having frequently visited my father's workplace since I was young and without a mother, they treated me like family. Thank you. That was all I could say with a trembling voice. Among my father's belongings, I found a diary. Most of the pages were blank, reflecting my busy father's character, with only brief notes written down. However, there was one date detailed in the diary. It was the day I got married. Lucy leaves home to start a new life. There, my father's warm compassion was expressed. At the end of the entry, his deep wishes for my future were inscribed. I hope she finds happiness and always has a smile on her face. This is my only wish. I could feel the coldness in my heart gradually warming up. I wanted to cherish my family like my father did and build a warm home. I resolved to have a serious talk with Paul again. I was confident that everything would go well. With my father's diary in hand, when I returned to my in-laws' house, what greeted me after a long absence was an unbelievable statement. I quit my job. Paul said this with a smile as if nothing was wrong. What? I was shocked and stunned, speechless. My father-in-law also declared with a smile, I quit my job too. Why would you do such a thing? As I looked back and forth at their faces, not understanding, my mother-in-law appeared with a cake. Today is a celebration. A celebration of what? I was still in mourning, and it wasn't a situation to celebrate. Of course, it's to celebrate your father's passing. Confused and bewildered, Paul explained further. Have you ever thought about why I married someone plain as you? It was all for your father's wealth. It ended quicker than I thought. Paul and my father-in-law were joyfully eating cake. It felt like the world was gradually losing its color. Until now, I believed there was happiness even amidst difficulties. I was so wrong. From the very beginning, they were after my father's assets. Though you're an incompetent wife who can't bear children, we decided to keep you here for your father's assets. My mother-in-law's arrogant words made me sick. You're old now, and you would be hopeless if you were thrown out, right? So we're keeping you in the house, Paul declared without looking at me. In return, make sure you take care of the house. My father-in-law repeated the demand. My hand holding the diary was trembling. That's enough. Leaving those words behind, I ran away from my in-laws' house. Once outside, my phone rang. Hello. I couldn't hold back my tears and confided everything to the person on the phone. Okay, I'm glad I prepared everything. After listening to everything, the person on the other end responded. 3 days later, I returned to my in-laws' house again. In my hand was a divorce paper. When I presented the divorce papers to Paul, his face contorted. What are you talking about? I can't accept our divorce. Of course, his reluctance wasn't out of love for me, but because he would lose the assets if I were gone. You have no choice. I already know about your affair. When I presented several photos, Paul was at a loss for words. The photos showed Paul being intimate with Mary. What an ungrateful woman. After all the upbringing, you repay us with betrayal? My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger as she tore the photos. Isn't it also your fault that you couldn't satisfy Paul? My father-in-law said mockingly, I am getting a divorce and leaving this place. At my declaration, Paul immediately retorted, I will never agree to a divorce. It seemed this family had no intention of letting go of my assets. I had anticipated as much. If you transfer the high-rise apartment to me, I might reconsider, Paul said with a smirk. I was astonished by his audacity. Since we're family, it's only natural for you to give up the high-rise apartment. If I can get that, I'll agree to the divorce. However, I had already known a fact that allowed me to accept their proposal. Paul and my in-laws were astonished by the unprecedented terms. Fine, I'll agree. Not long after, our divorce was finalized. Excited, perhaps, Paul and my in-laws immediately started preparing to move, and the next day, they moved into the high-rise apartment themselves. They all had plenty of time since none were employed. It seems they wanted to act quickly before I could change my mind. After selling their house, they embarked on a new life in the new residence. However, the next day, I received a frantic, angry call from Paul. "What were you thinking when you gave us this high-rise apartment? What's wrong?" I responded calmly. Paul's shout echoed in my ear. When I went to greet the neighbors, the vice president was there. "Oh yeah, that's right. Not just that, but the executive director lives on the opposite side of our room. Yes, and next to that is my new room." As I happily explained the situation, Paul grumbled in frustration. "I wasn't informed about this. What's the meaning of this?" There was no special meaning. This high-rise apartment was originally employee housing established by my father for his employees. It was offered to employees at a low cost, and those who could afford it later moved to other residences. Paul, having lived in his in-law's house, was unaware of the high-rise apartment's true purpose. My parents are receiving unfriendly stares, and my dad was glared at. "Everyone knows what you all did to me. It's not a big deal." As I retorted, Paul burst out of his room and began pounding on my door. "Come out. This is unforgivable." Naturally, his loud voice and commotion brought out other residents. For Paul, who had been the center of attention at his parents' house, this situation must have been unexpected. As the crowd murmured around us, I quietly opened the door. "What's so funny? I'll sue you for defamation." Paul was ranting, but I was no longer afraid. "I'm not lying, so claiming defamation is misplaced. I'm no longer your spouse, and if you continue to cause a scene, I will have to call the police." "What do you mean?" Paul, driven by anger, grabbed my collar. "Do you really think that's appropriate? There are many witnesses here and surveillance cameras." My whisper seemed to bring Paul back to reality. People had already gathered around us, and some were even recording. Upon releasing me hastily, Paul quickly explained to the surrounding people, "There is no problem." After the people had left, I told him, "Since I've transferred the high-rise apartment to you, make sure to pay all related expenses, okay?" The rent for this high-rise apartment was very low. The rental income was almost the same as the maintenance costs, including property tax and insurance. The compensation for the affair will be covered by 10 years' worth of rent. And after deducting my share of the rent, the calculation turned out slightly negative. That's unfair. This way, I also avoided the hassle of demanding compensation. 3 months later, Paul and his parents visited my residence again. "Please, help us." Even after the divorce, Paul thought owning the high-rise apartment would easily generate income, but reality was different. The costs and hassle to manage and maintain the building turned out to be higher than the rental income. For him, who had dreamed of semi-retirement, the unexpected difficulties of managing costs and all the hassle around, along with the responsibilities of being the owner of the high-rise apartment, were overwhelming. Every day, there were problems somewhere in the building, and consultations or complaints from residents were endless. They managed to get by for a few months with the rent, but with the property tax payment approaching, they seemed to have hit a financial dead end. Not just financial worries, but the mental pressure was immense. His parents also looked significantly aged, suffering from social stress. We are glared at wherever we go, sometimes confronted with complaints. There's no escape. My father-in-law shared his heavy feelings. We expected to live comfortably, but now without money, overwhelmed by household chores. I want to return to our previous life. My mother-in-law looked at me with teary eyes. What are they thinking? If they wanted to maintain their previous lifestyle, they should have made efforts toward that. It was too late to say such things now, and I had no intention of returning to those painful days. "Then, I'll buy it back from you." Using the high-rise apartment as bait to facilitate the divorce was the plan, and ultimately, the goal was to reclaim the high-rise apartment from them at virtually no cost. The person who contacted me back then was Mr. Reed, my father's right-hand man. For about 10 years since my marriage, I had never complained to my father. Yet, he seemed to have noticed the changes in me at some point. At my father's request, Mr. Reed investigated my in-law situation and even captured photo evidence of Paul's infidelity. He had been watching over me as I struggled, ready to offer full support whenever I sent an SOS. Paul's quitting his job was triggered by my father's misfortune. But Mr. Reed seemed to have anticipated that time would come. Thus, acting according to plan, after imposing social penalties with the help of former colleagues, it was time to impose financial penalties for Paul and his family. The high-rise apartment turned out to be a negative asset with its revenues in the red. Thus, selling it was their only option left. When the sale was completed, they were forced to leave the high-rise apartment. Their original home had already been sold. The house, being old, was valued mostly for its land, and Paul's family had to move to a modest apartment relying on that meager income. Naturally, the payment of compensation to me also resumed. Mary, who had high hopes for living in the high-rise apartment, was furious with a turn of events and was demanding compensation, claiming to have been deceived by Paul. Such a troublesome woman. Moreover, Paul has accepted her demands and still seems to want to mend their relationship. Truly foolish. In this situation, being unemployed was not an option, and Paul and my father-in-law began job hunting, but their high expectations have left them unemployed. My mother-in-law managed to find a part-time job, but her slow pace at work, due to years of being a housewife, meant she was being strictly managed by a supervisor close to my age. This was indeed poetic justice. There was only one instance when Paul came asking for money. Of course, he asked if he could delay the compensation payments. If you can't find a job, I can introduce you to one that's perfect for you. The job I had prepared for them was in cleaning services. It's tough but pays well. The harder the job, the better the salary. I whispered to a hesitant Paul, "If you take it seriously, you can do anything." I returned to him the same words he once used to mock me. Now, Paul and my father-in-law are engaged in that job. Cleaning work is said to have a purifying effect on the soul, so I think it's perfect for them. I continue to work at my father's company. Now, as the president's daughter, I am not given any special treatment but feel established as a member of the company. I feel this is the result of my years of hard work. Currently, the high-rise apartment is still used as company housing, and I receive words of gratitude from many people. That gratitude is my greatest joy. I plan to continue living in a way that brings joy to others. After all, that is the key to happiness my father taught me.